everybody, and welcome to another episode of To Customer Value and Beyond. This is our little show where we talk about tech, B2B SaaS, customer success, and customer value stories from a breadth of experience that we bring and that our guests bring along. This show will be live streamed on LinkedIn and YouTube, and a recording will be made available afterwards via Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. I'm Steven. I'm your host for today. Jim is not around this time, but I promise next time. And I think enough about us. And I'm super proud to welcome Angeley Mullins today to our show. Angeley, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Nice to be here.
Nice. And I heard you've been traveling quite a bit, so I'm really glad that we have you back and you were able to sneak us into your busy schedule. So thanks for joining us today.
Of course, only for you.
Angeley, I could now basically tell the world a lot about you, your experience, the great things you've done for go-to-market, for the world, and for us all to learn from you. So maybe if you have to put it into a few words, who are you and why are we talking today?
So hello, LinkedIn universe. I am Angeley Mullins. I'm the founder and CEO of Atheris Ventures. So it's a go-to-market advisory, also mentorship for founders and execs, which is quite popular, I will say, this year, and also do a lot of public speaking. But my background, so 20 years of go-to-market. I scaled 3 big tech companies, 3 scale-ups, 3 scale-ups, 1 unicorn, 1 IPO, and I've done everything from pre-seed all the way through IPO. Here in Berlin, 2 different scale-ups, which is quite nice, and have seen that journey, lots of fundraising rounds, etc. And then, as traveling as I do, I used to live in Australia and then started my career in the US.
Nice. Very impressive. I think everybody would be, or most would be quite happy to have 20% of what you've achieved so far. So amazing career you've already had, and great that you're also speaking a lot about it and sharing your knowledge, sharing your experience from that path. So and since we're speaking about that, how many times did you speak in the last 2 weeks?
Oh, I wouldn't even remember. It's pretty much been back to back. I mean, the last 2 weeks, maybe 5 or 6, different times. But within the past months, a lot. And it's one of the things that I've noticed, actually, especially in tech. Of course, AI is a big topic, but there's also something else, which is about work-life balance, burnout, what is actually leadership, what is actually go-to-market. I find, like, with all the options of choice, people are starting to ask questions and they're going back to the beginning and they're saying, okay, what is this really? And of course, with your show, Steven, like, what is actual value? What is customer value? People are starting to ask that as well. So yeah, there's a lot of talking that has been had.
I can imagine. And I think that's also visible when you look at all these like LinkedIn questions, right? And topics that pop up about what's actually our impact, right? Or just today, another post about the crisis in SaaS, right? What is AI doing with SaaS? What are VCs thinking? What are PEs thinking? And how can we actually prove our value? Combined with, I would call it, the customer success crisis, probably of the last 3 or 4 years, probably, right? Where things changed quite dramatically. I think there are sufficient topics nowadays to talk about, and where it makes a lot of sense to zoom out a bit and consider what, for example, go-to-market is. So discussing the topic with a handful of people will probably give you a few different opinions about it. How would you say, what's for you like the most, let's say, baseline explanation of what go-to-market is?
Mm-hmm. For me, it goes back to, how do you acquire a customer? And I think that touches all the bases between marketing, sales, and CS. A lot of companies, and I'll just go in our way back machine 5 years ago, it was all go super deep on your product, right? And not figure out if anyone wants to buy it. When you go into customer success universe, you had sales handing off deals to CS, and CS would be like, excuse me, we can't even service this. And sales is like, do something, and then it gets pushed to product, build something. So we had this little trifecta of fun. going around. But right now with AI, what I always tell founders right now is when the price of building a product or a feature either goes to zero or is significantly less with all of these low code, no code tools, how do you differentiate yourself, right? Even if you're using ChatGPT or any of the other GPTs, how do you get someone to say, this is the best software, for whichever vertical? How do you get them to mention you? For me, it goes back to brand, which is my favorite topic. But to answer your question directly, again, it's how do you actually acquire a client? That is go to market.
Yeah. And I think you touched another few very, very interesting pieces on top of that, right? Because I think especially if you now look to the AI sphere, it's always also adding to maybe what you said, important to consider that there's also a price for your internal resources, right? There's a cost to that, right? And I always appreciate when we have these discussions, especially with other founders, that there are basically three considerations, right? So how expensive would a solution be? How can I build it myself, right? And for the second one, and I think that's what I mean by the third one, is consider the cost of that, right? Because if you can't build it in a time frame of, I don't know, 2 weeks, right, with a manageable account of headcount, and then make sure it also works, and then the whole maintenance of all of that, maybe reconsider, right? Because pricing also is a topic in SaaS that is, I think, changing with all the per seat versus consumption base, and I think it's always worth considering that. So have you had these conversations about
100%.
how to handle that?
I would say, and you really find it in the enterprise SaaS space.
Yeah.
Because usually what will happen is these big enterprise clients, and let's say you're an early stage startup and you're a founder and you say, I'm trying to just get anyone into the funnel to prove that they have product market fit, and you get these big logos. This is where it starts. The big logos, what do they want? They want product customization. And they say, okay, I'll sign with you, but can I have this feature? I want it done this way. I want the data done this way. And usually the founder and the team say yes, because they're so excited to get the big logo on board. And then what happens? They say, okay, well, we can get one big logo, we can get 10, we can get 20. And then what you start to see over a very short period of time is you'll have 10, 20, possibly 30 clients, and they're all using the product in a different way. And they all have required customized productization. And then that puts so much excess burden, right, on your products teams, your operations teams, but also your customer success teams, because how do they upsell, right? So it just makes a really interesting, like I said, roundabout in the entire way. But this is really not so much with, I would say, SMB. It's really more in enterprise where you see this. It's almost just perfect textbook of how founders are doing this. And it's quite interesting that they haven't learned from these mistakes and from other founders that, have done this and can tell the tales. Because what usually ends up happening is you have to cut some of those clients loose, because then your teams come back to you and they say, look, we just can't service this. Or the cost of servicing those clients outweighs sometimes even the ACV, that they're worth.
And I think this is why it's so great that we also can have this conversation, right? Because in the end, it comes down to the value that you generate, right? And what's the value that your customers and maybe even their customers can get on the road, right? So how can that work for them? And I think it's so important there to understand that this is not necessarily just a go-to-market play. This is not a sales play. This is not just customer success having to onboard, and after onboarding make sure that there's some value, worst case, discovered, right, or realized. I think what I was trying to say is that it's so important to see this as like a holistic task for the whole organization, where, and a colleague of mine who I talked to this morning about it said it quite well, that he said, if your product is so great in delivering value, then you might not need all those like services and onboarding and guidance, because if your product would do all that, then that would be the service entailed in the product, right? But very few products can already do that. And once you talk to an organization where this value understanding is something which is spread with the whole organization and everybody's working to a similar direction, I think you can get to that point where the product does most of it. So maybe as a question, have you come across an organization where you thought they have really managed this holistic understanding of go to market and value and ingraining that into the product, and they've done it well? No need to mention names, but have you come
Yeah.
across one, and what were specifics where you thought, okay, that they nailed it?
I'll start with what I saw that was not the optimum model. So when I was working in Silicon Valley, I worked for a company called Intuit. They have a flagship software product called QuickBooks that a lot of people know. When I worked for them in Mountain View, California, right next to Google, they had 8,000 people to manage 3 different product lines. Just think about that. This was the era, right? And at that point in time, of course, larger organizational sizes meant something to people. And as senior executive leaders, people would say, oh, I've managed X hundred, of people, and that would carry some weight. It doesn't work like that anymore. And with the age of AI and Lovable, you see a lot of investors, they say, okay, the next $1 billion euro company could be a company of 1. So we've gone from 8,000 or more down to 1. So like you've said, people that are making products that actually have self-service onboarding, that actually when you get into a product, are intuitive. So your UX design easily can understand what's happening. Your demand generation, as an example, the content makes sense. So I always kind of put a nod. So if there's any founders listening, stop firing your content teams. So this is the one thing I see with AI. Oh, we'll just get rid of them because AI can do everything. On the content perspective, no, it can't. And you don't want your content to look like everyone else's content. So I think that's important. From a pure product, I'll call it product discovery perspective, if you do a really good job and make it intuitive, which means that you had to do all the research beforehand, right? And you had to do the testing, then yes, you can really get that engine to flow. I think, again, the question goes back to enterprise sales when it's very complex, when you have multifunctional, sales. I think that becomes a little bit different. But I think for the majority of founders, yes, I think you can really, slim that down. And these low code, no code tools can absolutely help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, and we've seen that in the past also with process management tools, for example, which were mostly about democratizing, right, the access to these tools. And I think these no-code, low-code tools are a perfect example of that, where basically the teams themselves who have a challenge without needing to involve IT can actually solve process challenges they might have, right? In the end, all we do is somehow process, right? And you need a solution for that. And so I really love that, thinking about like onboarding teams who can leverage such a tool to just streamline their onboarding process, right? To know who is doing what when, and maybe something needs to be prepared, and then I can give a task to someone, right? Or even an agent to have them do that. But I'm fully aligned with you for the point that the content thing is it's just so
it's critical. It's critical.
so critical, but it also you can see that it's gotten so normalized, right? So all the stuff you see, it's just it could be the same company using different logos posting stuff, right? And sharing content. And I think this is really a place, like with all the stuff you now see on the social media platforms, where it just gets so I forgot what the name was, the for that AI stuff. But it just gets, you can't really differentiate anymore, right? And if you see a company that really does it well, you will notice, right? And that's your place to be.
So I always say, between now and 2030, which, we're coming into the end of 2025, so we're looking at 4 years, authenticity will become the new premium.
Yeah.
And right now, whether it's LinkedIn or any other channel, sometimes you'll see these labels, it's AI generated, or people will comment. What you're going to see by 2030 is you're going to see these labels saying, this is a real human. Yeah. This is authentic content. It's true, because we're going to, become flooded with so much. And I think there's going to be so much downward pressure from investors to make sure that things are as automated as possible. And when you look at founders, they're first point of action, right, was to cut content teams. Now they're starting to bring them back, or they're starting to have the realization like, oh my gosh, the AI content actually isn't working as well as we thought it was. It kind of reminds me, I think, of Klarna. Wasn't it Klarna that decided to try to cut their entire customer support team, and then they had to bring them back? So this type of thing, you're going to see more and more of it. Authentic content, talking to real humans will become a premium and a luxury. So just think about the shift that we're going to see over the next, 4 to 5 years.
Absolutely. And what surprised me is coming from that process and automation background is knowing how complex these projects are, right? So even semi-automating or automating a rather simple process, right? Like I mentioned this onboarding, for example, or enablement processes. It already takes time to make sure it works, right? To actually do a quality check on that. And things haven't changed that much in the realm of no-code, low-code platforms in the last 5 years, as people might think. The change we have now, and N8N I think is a great example, and there are other tools like Signavio Workflow, Effective, and Camunda, and other players in that realm, many more. Those tools haven't changed a lot in the last few years. What changed is that you can now add the AI integration, right? It's basically like a switch you can turn on now and say, okay, this task is not a task that will go to a human and you have to do a task. Instead, it will, most of the cases, will send a prompt to ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude or whatever, and will send something back. And you have to be very specific about, okay, well, first about the process, right? How it works, but then also about the prompt and what data it will give you. Because once you press the button and say, okay, all my, I don't know, a few hundred inquiries I get per day or week, they will all go through there. And I want to make sure that the quality that the customers actually receive as a response has to be great. And so far, I still lack to see well, at least with many people, the understanding how much of an overhead this also creates in just making sure it works, that the content is great, that the response is great, right? You mentioned the support team, that my customers feel well serviced, which can create a new risk of itself if they don't. So I think this is a real challenge I currently see. And looking at what you saw in companies, so have you seen something where you thought, okay, this approach might actually work? So what could be prerequisites for before jumping into it maybe too quickly?
Mm-hmm. So I gave a speech earlier this summer to a bunch of C-levels, and I basically told them, the new org charts and what they're going to look like over the next 5 years. You're going to have very experienced strategists in different areas. So think of a marketing, a sales, a CS strategist. So in the engineering department, this would be equivalent to a chief engineer or a distinguished engineer, architect. You're going to have these equivalents in these particular areas on the go-to-market side, and they will be managing a ton of different AI agents. So we're not there now, but we will be there in 4 to 5 years. And to kind of point out to what you said, people are not learning right now the art of prompting. Right now, it's not so much about learning how to code. Sorry for all the engineers out there right now, but it's learning about how to prompt properly and also having the experience to be able to understand, is there a hallucination? Does this actually make sense? To use your critical thinking back for the business to make sure that AI and those AI workflows are actually working in the way that's accretive to your business. That can only be done by somebody who knows what they're doing and has the experience of executing, right, all of these different initiatives. So I think that's something that we're going to see. I think what I feel bad for, though, right now is people in the early stages of their career. What will happen to these roles? We're already seeing, and I forget what article it was, but I want to say the big consulting firms, so you look at McKinsey, BCG, these kind of consulting firms, they're already starting to cut out the lower tiers, so the entry level of their consultants. In the tech industry, you're going to start to see these entry level jobs, so junior to mid-level roles, go away or be replaced by AI. And then what are they going to need? Very experienced people that can then manage these AI agents. And I think this is where we're going.
Yeah, and I fully agree, and I think I see this in the founder realm already, where in a lot of conversations you basically everybody agrees on, okay, you don't need somebody who's great in theory, right? You don't need somebody who maybe you've done it at some point and now is theorizing about how it could be, but you also don't need the juniors who still need to learn how to do it. You need to find someone that knows how to work and then executes and implements it also. But I think it's also true for SaaS that this will happen as well. And I saw that already in a few companies where it was about like maybe sales leaders or customer success or support leaders where they also said, okay, if I find someone who understands how to set up the process, set up the tooling, and then can make sure that I have a scalable process, they will hire maybe one or two other people who can support them with it, but they don't need this 20-person team anymore that they have to manage. So I think it's already quite happening more than we would love to, and I think it's really tough for everybody who's now leaving uni and trying to find their first job.
Really tough. I mean, that could be a whole nother conversation when we talk about Gen Z, and I think isn't it Gen Alpha that comes after them and what they're going to do. For right now in tech, not only is prompting a number one skill, but also what I tell leaders is critical thinking. Because sometimes people will ask me, okay, what's the biggest tech skill you can learn? And look, there's tons of tools, right, that you can learn. There's tons of skills. But critical thinking, in my view, is the number one skill. Why?
In life.
In life, but also in tech. For you to be able to challenge some of these processes, to challenge some of the tools, to make sure that you're doing things in the right way. And I always equate it to Google Maps. So I think we talked about this when we had one of our last meetups at HubSpot that you moderated. But if you remember back to the days when Google Maps came out, right? Before then, everyone either had to know where they were going or they'd have a paper map and they'd have to know their bearings. Now, including myself, so I'm guilty of this, I can't go to the coffee shop without my phone and Google Maps, turn right, turn left, 500 meters, whatever. It will be the same thing with AI. Because people are relying on ChatGPT and other GPTs and other AI tools so much. So just give it a few years. You've already seen the studies kind of coming out about people's brain activity, right, on some of these GPTs, but it will get to the point where the critical thinking will go out the door. Who is left then to steer the ship and to make sure that in CS, marketing, sales, the whole of go-to-market, right, is happening the way it should? And I think that's one of the important things that as an industry we need to look at, but also if you're listening to this and you're a founder or CEO, one of the most important things.
Yeah, and I think especially this critical thinking, right? And really making sure that you take the right learnings and adapt them and implement them in a way that works for your business and your challenge. I think that's super critical, right? Because I saw this also now being a founder myself, building a product that in a lot of conversations where it's also about product building, about engineering, about how to leverage these new tools, you tend to have conversations with mostly people that haven't had a lot of interaction with tech and product in the past, who basically say everybody can build now, right? And some of the very famous SaaS influencers we have as well make it appear as if in a week you can build an agentic BDR SDR team, right? And everything will be fine, right? And it will not be BS messages flooding inboxes and nobody will respond anywhere. They make it sound like that. And I think there's a lot of where I think also and hope that the thought leadership realm will also reconsider how they talk about it, right? Because when I talk to very senior engineers who are aware how also AI works and how it can help them, they say it's quite scary how much code is created nowadays without any checks, right? So if I tell Lovable, for example, it's great for prototypes, great for front end stuff. There's certain things you can do really well with it, creating websites and stuff. But creating a backend, right, with, I don't know, single sign-on functionality and which should be GDPR compliant and all that stuff, after maybe, I don't know, 10,000 rows of code, might make sense to take a break and check what you created before some enterprise will use it at some point. So
100%.
that's something that's a bit scary at the moment.
It is. And I think, when you talk about some of the influencers out there, sometimes they're just saying things to get clickbait. But I think the scarier piece is some of the investors are pushing this type of, I'll call, trend.
Yeah.
And without having the clear understanding of what it actually takes to build and run a scale up, when you look at, let's take it to like a different, type of industry. Let's say your banking systems, right? Do you want a low code, no code, system running the back end of your banking or your financial systems when things are on the line? Security systems, defense systems. So I'm sure if you talk to people in those industries, they're just having a big laugh and saying, yeah, okay, come back in 10 years. So I think right now in tech, we like to ride these trends or these fads and everything's new. Low code, no code is still being battle tested, even in building websites, right? I mean, I've built quite a few websites in my career, and still I will rely on a very senior developer to come in because there are, specifications that I want, and not all the low code, no code tools can do that. I think they have their use cases, but it would be interesting. We take this snapshot today, and then let's say 5 years from now, we take another snapshot and let's see how things develop. But it's just not there yet. And you're right. The amount of code that's being generated, and I question, is it useful code that's being generated?
Absolutely. And I loved what you said about like the thought leadership and influence around, right? Because I think what everybody always has to repeatedly tell themselves is LinkedIn has turned pretty much into a marketing platform, right? So it hasn't been that much in the past. It's always been a little bit, but mostly it's gotten to that point, right? Where it's mostly about marketing and people marketing either themselves, right? Or their brands and their companies. And I think what everybody, especially who's been in the industry for a longer time, understands, and I think everybody else should understand, that ourselves included, everybody else, we're always talking about our experiences, right? You try to take what's new, like AI and what happens, and you try to compare it with experiences you made in the past, and then you might suggest a way forward, or you give your opinion about what you think about it, right? But I'm always careful, and probably should say it even more often, that this is just an opinion, right? This is maybe a suggestion to a solution, but we all don't have the full picture. And I think having talked to, and I think we share that experience, having talked to a lot of PEs, VCs, founders, and angels, is sometimes it feels like we all listen to the same podcasts, we all read the same newsletters, and we're all quite aligned a week after, right?
Yeah,
and so at these points, you kind of come to the conclusion that you say, yeah, we all heard and read the same things and we got our opinions of that, but everybody else, and getting back to your critical thinking point, think about that, right? And even if 90% of the people have that one opinion, you might belong to the 10% that should have another opinion. So always remind of that.
And when you think about go to market, because I think this point hits go to market particularly hard, is, people will ask me as an example, what's the best go to market playbook? And you can look on LinkedIn, there's a new playbook being published every single day. And what I always tell founders is, if all those playbooks worked for every single circumstance, you could just download it, or the publisher could sell it on Amazon, $99.99 click, and you would download it and you would execute it and everyone would be rich, right? That's not happening for a reason. And go to market, again, when you ask me about what's the fundamentals, how do you acquire a client? That acquisition process will be different for you. It'll be different for me. It'll be different for the founder in Berlin, Paris, London, wherever, because their use case is different. Their vertical is different. Their product is different. Their positioning is different. So there's no one fits all solution. And this is especially true for go-to-market, and you really need that critical thinking to come in. And I feel like with the AI tools, you see people publish these workflows. And there's a lot of influencers out there, and they have really great clickbait, so I'll give them that. but they publish these workflows. We have 10 million ARR. Here's the work stack, that did it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Here are the work tools.
Just copy.
Right. Just call me. I know what to do. And not to say that all those tools are wrong, because there's some great tools out there that they do recommend, but it doesn't mean that tool stack will work for you. It doesn't mean that go-to-market playbook will work for you. And the really good strategists, so going back to how this will be in 5 years from now, the really good strategists are going to say, wait a second, how do we acquire a client? What is our go-to-market? What's the best way for us? And I just think that's important. So since we're doing the LinkedIn Live, not every playbook on LinkedIn is going to be your path to success.
Have you, maybe because it touches this roughly, have you come across, probably working with founders is probably what we're talking about now, have you come across like unrealistic expectations which were fed by that you had maybe people that expected results in probably an unrealistic time frame? Have you come across about something like that?
Many times. I mean, the classic one that I think a lot of people in the go-to-market world can relate to is, let's do 100% outbound prospecting, and we're going to create a scalable model out of that in a month or 2 months. And let's just throw a bunch of BDRs, SDRs in a room and just do this pray and spray, and everything is just going to come back to us, and it's going to be exactly our ICP, right? Because of course it will be. And
Sure.
They wonder, why are people not answering these random spam messages? Outbound works, but it works in certain use cases, right? With certain types of messaging that's not always AI generated, right? With SDRs who are really great and passionate about what they do, when they actually take the time to do research about the people, that they're sending these messages to. So it's not to say that outbound can't be done, but you see a lot of founders. And again, I think it's not just the founders, it's also pushed down by the investors. So, we want to spread the responsibility around and say investors are getting together. And like you said, they're reading the same blog, newsletter, they're, drinking at the same water cooler, whatever it may be. They have this idea in their head, and then they publish their newsletter to their portfolio CEOs, and they're saying, oh, we think you should do this, or we think you should do that. And then the CEOs take that as gospel, and then they try to push it down. And then you have people who are experts in their field. So whether it's sales, CS, marketing, whatever it might be, saying that doesn't exactly work like that. And then this is where the unrealistic expectations come in. So it's very important to listen to the people who are on the ground, who are on the front lines. And what I always tell founders is, when you're doing the interview with this person, doesn't matter what role it is, if you don't trust them, don't hire them. Once you've hired them, then you need to remember that you trusted them based off of your experience. And any technical topic, it doesn't matter how involved it is, can always be simplified down so you can have that common understanding. But yes, I've seen many founders kind of do this runaway, we're going to get results, in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And I wish it worked like that.
100%, yeah. And I think this is all kind of interconnected, right? And I think once we've gotten through this, I don't know if it's still a hype cycle, probably, right? Once we've gotten through this AI hype cycle, right, I think we will get back to more, let's say, tangible conversations, and more, let's say, not tangible is not the right word, but more realistic expectations, right? And we'll actually talk about, okay, tangible results, right? How we can get to certain outcomes. And I think there's just been so many changes, right? Since COVID, for example, now with the AI, with remote work, with all that to me, it often feels like we didn't really finish one of the topics yet, right? So we're still understanding, okay, how do we do hybrid work? How do we do remote work, in office work, AI, scaling, robotic, all these things, that I can't wait for a time when things will slow down a bit again. This will happen.
Right. It's actually, it brings up a factoid that I read, and I forget if his name, it's Mr. Barry. It was the serial investor analyst from The Big Short. So it was based off of the real
that guy, yeah.
investor guy.
Great
But
movie, by the way.
I just read that he just shorted basically AI. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this is the expert of experts. What does he know? What does he see? Do I think AI is here to stay? Yes. Do I think it will continue? Yes.
Yeah.
Do I also think that this is kind of like the .com era when everybody was rushing with their .com and then things collapsed because it was overhyped? I think there's a big possibility of that.
Yeah. And I think it's also, so far we've gotten through this hype cycle without at least dramatic consequences, right? So there's been a lot of investment and just very opportunistic behavior towards AI, right? And just implementing it, doing it. We had a few, like the reduction of support teams, right? So there was a lot of personal impact so far, but looking from a um, uh, um, community standpoint, right? From that point, I think there hasn't been too much. So just today, I read something about that there was the first, or one of the first, at least public AI run hacks that happened, right? Where also I read a bit into it and what's possible once you actually are able to deploy AI as a hack, basically, right? So something that will translate itself. And I think once those things become a bit more apparent, I think that will be quite enlightening, right? How careful you have to be, and how maybe the AI Act in Europe might be a good idea to maybe even make a bit more strict. So yeah,
We're in
I'm
Europe.
curious to see where this will go.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm an American, as you can tell. So I come from the non-regulation, where I know in Europe we regulate everything. So for me, it's going to be very interesting to see the dichotomy in the
Yes.
two theories, right? So we basically have the US and China, which are going full force, and then in Europe, everything's regulated. So I think the interesting thing will be, how will AI take shape in these different continents?
Yeah.
And what will the results be? What I usually find with new technologies is it goes full force and then there's an overcorrection and then it kind of comes back. So let's see what happens. I'm more interested about all the robotics that's happening.
Yeah.
And you have a company in London called Humanoid. They're competing with Elon Musk, creating these robots. I think just saw, I forget what city was in, but there's a fully robotic coffee shop now that will do your coffee for you. So these types of things are taking hold. And I think it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Where you said if there's good onboarding processes and what will that do? So I think we're just going to see quite a bit, right, in the next 4 to 5 years. But the robotics thing is actually one to watch. So AI agents on the software side, but then in daily life, robotics.
Yeah. And I think it's all about the balance, right? So I think you have to, over-regulation never is good. No regulation is usually not a good idea, right? So I think finding middle ground, and sometimes, and I think I have family in the US as well, and over the last at least decade being very deep in the startup field as well, I learned a lot about how sometimes to not be too German about innovation, right? And rather try out a few things, try to be innovative, and then reconsider. And I think, for speaking about my time at Signavio, for example, I think this is also what made us very strong, right? So trying out new things, but then reconsider and never be too proud to scrap something, right? So if it doesn't work, let it go, right? So give it a try and then do something new. So I would like to combine two things, because earlier we talked about also something which is also super important to me as being a parent, about the next generation, right? And what they should be doing. I told you earlier, right? So my oldest son, he's 15 now. He's doing an internship at the moment, funnily enough, at a tech company here in Potsdam. So very exciting for him to learn about that. And oftentimes we talk about, like, what are the skills, what are like unique skills you gotta have to be successful in a future where there might be even more automation, right? More agentic AI, more robotics. So is there something where you think, or if you would talk to your kids, for example, something where you would say, okay, maybe that's a direction worth pursuing if you want to, I don't know, have a great career in 5, 10, 15 years?
This is quite timely because I just came back from Edinburgh and I gave a speech to, nearly 500 students.
Wow.
And the topic was, their unlimited potential and what they could do, what they could be. These particular students were already studying robotics and AI. So, like I said, I think robotics and in all of its forms will be probably one of the number one things. But there was one student there and she raised her hand and she said, yes, but I really love writing. And I said, that's fantastic. You can write about it and you can write about all kinds of, things. So it's not to say that robotics is the only way to go, but this is going to be one of the biggest game changers, right? AI is going to get to the point, and I don't know if it was Sam Altman that said, but it was stated that AI used to be like a high school student. Now it's a university student. It will soon or is already reaching PhD level. So by the time your children are ready to go to university, AI is going to be so far, right, out of the gate. It's going to do a lot of things for us, which opens up kind of what I'm hoping for is it will open up this new creative renaissance. So really find what you love to do and then figure out a way to optimize that. This is what I'm hoping will happen. But if it doesn't go that way, I would just tell anyone and everyone there's two things you can do. Number one, learn how to prompt. Learn how to prompt. Number two, anything to do with robotics. So whether you are making them, optimizing them, selling them, servicing them, figure out how to work with robotics in any kind of way possible, because that is the future.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I would add maybe very, let's say, hands-on jobs. I remember reading a book probably 15 years ago from I think Larry Page and Sergey Brin about basically like a future outlook and how workforce and working would look in the future. And even then, I think they already said that doing very specific things like cutting hair, right?
Yeah.
Something which is very dependent on interaction and very fine motoric things, and where also people might appreciate sitting next to a person for 30 minutes instead of a machine, or maybe very specific
Like
type of
plumbers,
furniture, right?
electricians.
Yes.
So I think
Yeah.
it was the NVIDIA, I think, CEO that was also saying something similar, like your plumbers, electricians, carpenters, these kind of things. And yes, things that robots cannot replicate, things that still require service, things where you want this specified human kind of service. So there are artists. There was an artist, I have to get her name, but she just came out with a song called Bergheim. So basically the same
Oh
name as
yeah,
the
I saw
club
that.
here in Berlin. So it's all over social media at the moment. And one of the things that she said was, she said, I want people to know that this is a human album, a human generated album.
Yeah.
So you're starting to see almost this backlash happen. But it's like I said, at the beginning of our call today together is authenticity will become the new premium. It'll become the new luxury. And anything that is authentic and human generated, you're going to start to see labels for this saying this was done by a human being. And it's already starting to happen.
I love it. And I think that's probably a very nice ending already. I was just considering how we might end this conversation because could talk to you for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 hours, and it would be a blast. So thank you for that, because I just imagined myself being a few years older and maybe relying on some help. I would probably opt in for a human, no matter if everybody has a robot around, right? I might opt in for a human, so I will make sure that these jobs will still exist. So thank you, Angeley, for your great insights, and it was a great pleasure. I hope we see each other very, very soon at one of our meetups, or at some other events we have all over Berlin. Everybody who's curious, we will be back at HubSpot during our next customer success meetup on the 26th of November. We will have a great panel, which will this time be focused around tech and go-to-market. We will have Tatjana Pohl from HubSpot there. We will have Shada Amara from an engineering perspective there. And Gondana McNamara, which you, I think, will also know very well, will be there as well in our panel. As you were in our panel last time, thank you also for that.
It was great. So to anyone who's listening, go to the panels at HubSpot. I had the pleasure of attending one of the previous ones with two Italian guys, which was absolutely phenomenal. A great time at HubSpot. So for all of you, please do go to the next one.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Shout out to Cesare and Giuseppe. And really looking forward to this. Have a great evening, Angeley. Thank you for joining us. And to everybody else, looking forward to seeing you soon. We will share the recordings and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.